When we hear ourselves speaking, we think more clearly than if we sit alone in a room and just think about it silently. So if there's someone out there who's like, I really would like to come up with my personal values, I would encourage that person to go out and talk with people they know and trust about it. And I think they will gain a lot of clarity, but it doesn't need to happen overnight. Like, gift yourself some time to do it, but that's a good starting point.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutevik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I spoke with Laine Schmidt, the founder of Laine Schmidt Coaching. Laine Schmidt Coaching is an organization of professional coaches based in South Florida, serving clients across the country. Laine's company has guided 300 plus individuals and teams through proven processes to help them break out of their routines, reframe their outlook, and implement better ways to work so they can reach their personal and professional goals. Laine herself has worked as a mentor and coach since 2004 and began Laine Schmidt Coaching, Inc. in 2016. Laine has worked with clients nationwide to help them create clear systems and productive habits, leading them to greater success. I can't wait for you to hear more about how she creates a vibe through her passion of creating community with her clients and her team. All right, Laine, well, I am so excited to have you and to hear about your experiences and how you've created or helped people create good vibes in the workplace. And so I just first want to ground all of our listeners and our conversation in you helping me understand like how you define a vibe.
Well, thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here. How I define a vibe. I think vibes answer the question, as a team, who are we? So for example, if you were to ask your team members, what are some adjectives that describe our team? I think that defines your vibe.
Yeah, gosh, that's great because it's so simple. People can come up with adjectives that they feel. Okay, so before we get into like some other questions, I just want to know a little bit more about you, of how you got to where you're at today. And I don't mean in the fact of like walk me through your resume, but really walk me through the experiences that you've had that have shaped your career and the vibes that were created, the good and the bad that you had, and what you've taken from those and positioned into your current company today to help others create a vibe and for you to create the vibe for your own team.
You know, I have been very, very lucky along the way to have amazing people to learn from. I was in education for 11 years before I got into business coaching. And during that time, I had a great mentor. His name was Dave Ingram. And he taught me, I feel like, most of what I know when it comes to how to treat others and how to create good environments for others. And because of my practice of that in the classroom, it very, very naturally spilled over into the coaching company. And so it's funny because, you know, you think, oh, well, those are young adults as opposed to professionals, but humans are humans. And people respond to certain behaviors regardless of their age. And so I would just say I was very fortunate to have Dave to learn from. He was just a master at caring for people well. And so that was a great gift in my professional upbringing, I would say. My husband has also been a great mentor to me. He is also just a people ninja. He's just really good with people. And so being able to watch him and observe him and learn from him has also been a great gift.
So tell me about, you said Dave, right? How did that show up? So it's one thing to know a person and understand them and see it and observe it in action. But if you had to describe to people how that showed up and what you learned from how he showed up, what would that be?
I'll give you an example. There was one day, he and I actually shared a classroom.
Okay.
I was a very young teacher and I was teaching older children who were taller than I was. And so I always felt like I had to establish my authority. And I remember there was one day where Two young women walked in my room, two young students, and their shirts were untucked. It was a private school. They had uniforms. And I remember saying to them in my authoritative voice, leave the room and come back in when your shirts are tucked in. And he looked at me and he very gently just giggled and shook his head like he did. And he goes, that's not going to work for you. He goes, you need to speak to those girls differently. And he said, people always need to feel welcomed right when they see you. And then if you need to talk to them about something, then you talk to them. He said, but that type of communication should never be the first type of communication. So that's one example. He also just went out of his way to go above and beyond with everyone in his sphere to make sure that they were cared for, to make sure that they were heard. They had someone who would listen to them whenever they needed it. And he was never judgmental. He was never quick to judge. He was never quick to criticize. He was a great listener and spent time going out of his way to make sure people felt cared for.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty amazing. Gosh, talk about like meeting people where they're at, right? With those girls walking into the classroom. I don't know how old they are. I'm assuming maybe like middle school or
14. Yes.
Yes. I have a 14-year-old myself, so I can relate to that. It's probably a tactic I should start using with her.
Well, I have a 14-year-old too, and it is different when it's your own kid. So I'm glad we're talking about this because it's a good reminder for me as well. I'm like, oh, I got to do this more at home.
Yeah, seriously. Okay, so, one question I have then, and maybe in your practical experience of using some of these tactics that you learned from him, how do you have enough time in the day to ensure that the sphere that you have gets the care and attention that it needs?
I think it's a mental muscle that we build to remind ourselves that the tasks will get done, but caring for people has to be the first priority. So you make the time. And I think that once we really practice this about putting people first, it just becomes a part of how we work during the day. You and I both work with companies. And so we both see the drive for revenue and the drive for meeting KPIs and the drive for excellence. All those things are good and needed. But what's needed more is to be sure the people we're driving are taken care of. And so it really is just a big perspective shift. And I feel like when we practice that, it becomes much more natural to us. And it then naturally fits in our day so that we don't feel like, oh, this is something I have to fit in. But it's a naturally occurring thing. And then the other things we have to fit in.
Yeah. It's like you get to do it. You don't have to do it. And the other things you have to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So talk to me. Have you experienced anything in your career where you've had kind of a terrible experience or not so favorable, I guess, and you put that in your mental Rolodex and said, when I am leading people or when I'm running my company, that is something I will make sure to not do? Because I think the things we do and focus on are almost as important as the things we remember not to do so that we don't let those things kind of creep into our day-to-day.
As a leader, I've made a million of those mistakes myself. And those are also notes in my head that don't ever go away. But I do remember being in a certain scenario where a leader on our team would criticize other team members in front of the group. And that was always a morale killer. I mean, it was toxic. And so that's one thing that always stood out to me. I was like, you know what? We all need feedback, but what's the best way to do that? And that was just one thing that always stood out to me as something not to do. So that was one thing. And
what was the impact of that leader? Like, how did that manifest within the team?
People were afraid to speak up because they thought, oh, am I going to get criticized? Because if I am criticized, it will be in front of everyone. Everything was inward. Everything was they kept everything to themselves. That's not helpful. And so that was one of the things that happened there.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. You were about to go into a story and I want to hear it.
Oh, well, there's a great story about Continental Airlines. This is a great reminder to me whenever I think of culture. This is a great example. In the 1990s, they were bankrupt. Continental Airlines had gone bankrupt. So they brought in a new CEO. His name was Gordon Bethune. And Gordon completely changed everything for Continental. And within 1 year, he had taken them to being the number one airline. And the way he did it, he did not buy faster airplanes. He did not have more training for his customer service team. It wasn't anything like that. All he did was he created an open door policy. And he took a lot of time to get to know the people that he was working with. He took a lot of time listening to them and exploring their thoughts and ideas. And what happened is, because those people felt like they were so important, they then started treating the customers that way. And so it was this downward, well, not spiral, that's a negative thing. It was, it was a snowball effect of that. People feeling cared for, therefore they treated other people that way. And it made a huge difference in the health and growth of the company. And again, it had nothing to do with operations, and it had everything to do with human relations. And so that's always an example that comes to my mind when I think of leaders who have done culture well.
Yeah, gosh, that is a great story. I've read a book similar, not different company, but very similar, in a space that's less favorable in the janitorial service space. And they did something very similar of just like a listening tour almost to really understand what's important to their people, and had a very similar effect, probably a little bit longer, but something very, very similar. So
I would love to read that book. I'm curious what their implementation is. We have found a lot of times when we talk to our clients about this, it's great to go on a listening tour. Please go on a listening tour, or just build it into your everyday activities. But a danger with that is if you do that and then it stops there, because people go, oh, I told you everything you wanted to hear, but you didn't do anything with it. So I'd love to hear how the implementation of that went, because the implementation is as important, if not more, than the gathering of feedback.
Yeah. I mean, my experience with those listening tours is something quite similar. It's very similar to like doing a full-blown engagement survey, right? Is like you do it, you get information, and then something happens, but it's not widely communicated what actually happens. And so people don't feel like anything happens. And my, I guess, philosophy behind that is that we as leaders overcomplicate what we heard. So just as simple as the care and concern. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they had this phrase of like, just say hello. And it was kind of like this inside joke that they had with this group, but it was as simple as that. It was like, so the tactic was, when you walk into a room, just say hello, and then see where it goes from there. And so I think my experience has been that the listening tours, then like they collect the data and they analyze the data and they do the data, instead of like just hearing it and going and doing something about it right then and there.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And it's all well intended. But it's leaders who go, okay, now we have this information, and now we're going to try to change the entirety of our company overnight. And that never goes well. And so just like you're saying, is it start small and build from there. And I love how you say, just go do it right now. How much less stress, how much shorter would all of our to-do lists be if we just did things as they came, instead of putting them off until later? Yeah.
Right. I know. And just the simple like niceties of life. It's not even like, again, these overcomplicated things, right? Like you were saying, people just want to feel cared for and heard. And so let's make it happen and incorporate it into our everyday life, instead of making it like this other thing that we set on the shelf and we do over here, and we only do it at the times that are blocked on our calendar.
Exactly. And that's what we work on the most. So at our company, we work on top-down value-based culture building.
Okay, talk to me about that. I'm so interested.
Well, it's what we've seen. You know, we've worked with hundreds of small businesses and thousands of people over the last 7 years. And it's just a theme we have seen is mission, vision, values are a funny thing. Typically, they're created and they're put on a website to look pretty, and then they go there and die, right? And we're huge advocates of taking those values and bringing them to life, like put action to them. Because when you have values that are naturally assigned to your company, meaning if you have a leader who is naturally, we'll say, generous, you have a leader who is naturally genuine. I have one client coming to mind. One of their values is human. And if you met the leader, you'd understand why. He's very approachable. He's very funny. Everybody wants to be around him, and he's very authentic. So when you have values that are created based on who either the leader or the leadership team naturally is, it naturally builds a culture based on those things. Instead of, a lot of times we work with companies who they're like, oh, well, we saw this other company that had these values and we think those are good, so we're going to use those too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not going to be the path of least resistance, right? The path of least resistance is creating values that are natural to you. Who are you? Who is your leadership team? And then that snowballs, as we mentioned earlier, into the rest of the team. A lot of times we see people who, and again, these aren't bad things, but they go, okay, we really need to build culture. So we're going to have Taco Tuesdays at the office. We're going to create a text chain where we celebrate wins. All of these things are good. There's nothing, we're going to put a bulletin board up and we're going to write good things about each other. All those things are great, but they're not an organic way. Those are more initiatives. Those aren't threads of who you are as a company. So to create a culture that's really healthy, you want it to come from the values that answer the question, who are we? So we have, 5 main categories we look at within the organization and say, how can you take those values and apply it to these things? Human resources. How do you apply your values to your hiring, to your firing, to your feedback? Training and development. How do we apply the values while we're training people? Communication. That's a big one, both internal and external. How do we apply these values to how we communicate to our team and to our clients? So, we have these different categories and we go, take who you are and weave it into everything you do. Don't let it die on a website and don't let it become a once a quarter initiative that nobody is really going to be excited about. Make it part of everything you do.
So how do you get a leader to uncover who they are authentically? Because sometimes leaders walk into a room with an ego or with a stigma, or this idea of vulnerability isn't going to get them anywhere and it's only going to cause problems. So if we dial it back one notch, what do you do to break the shell?
Well, it's really different for everyone in that each individual is different and each team is different. So sometimes if you have a solopreneur who's creating a business and creating these, we call these purpose points, mission, vision, values, they're the purpose points. It really is going to be based on that person. But if you have a small startup or an existing company, then you've got a whole leadership team. So it really depends, because if you've got that solopreneur, that's actually harder than if you're working with the team, which is funny because a lot of times you're like, oh, there's so many cooks in the kitchen. How do you all agree? It's actually harder with an individual because people have a really hard time identifying who they are. And to give us and your listeners some freedom here, this doesn't happen overnight. It really doesn't. This is something allow yourself to have a starting point and be open to flexing along the way. As we learn about ourselves and learn about our people we're serving, be open to flexing a little bit and changing those values as needed. People are like, oh, if I put something down on paper, this is it. I'm married to these. But you're not. It's just a starting point. So how do individuals uncover who they are? The neat thing about coaching, it's funny because a lot of people think coaching is like a kumbaya session where you sit around and a lot of people think that, but there really is a science to coaching. And I won't bore you with the whole science of it. But one thing that's really interesting is different parts of your brain are activated when you speak out loud as opposed to when you just think. So if we have an individual who's like, I really want to identify who I am and come up with some good values, if they just sit by themselves in a room and think about it, that's good. That's a good thing. That's a good practice. But if they meet with someone, whether it's a friend or a colleague or a coach or a mentor or a parent, whoever it might be, and really talk through it. And if that person asks them lots of questions and draws out their thoughts, like you're doing with me, you're very good at this, and draws out these thoughts, it's going to activate a different part of their brain. And that is the part of the brain that is for clarification. So when we hear ourselves speaking, we think more clearly than if we sit alone in a room and just think about it silently. So if there's someone out there who's like, I really would like to come up with my personal values, I would encourage that person to go out and talk with people they know and trust about it. And I think they will gain a lot of clarity. But again, it doesn't need to happen overnight. Gift yourself some time to do it, but that's a good starting point.
Awesome. Okay, so talk to me about the values and the core of your business, right? And what makes you the leader that you are and creating the vibes that you want to create within your organization. What's one core value that you really, really hang your hat on and runs through as a thread in your organization?
A core value that's a prerequisite for our industry is curiosity. I have naturally always been a curious person. That's why I went into education. That's why I've landed in coaching. I love learning. I love learning about people. I love learning about their stories. I know you do as well. We've talked about that. I love learning about the world that we live in and history and why do things happen the way they do? How do things work the way they do? My brain's always curious and questioning and wondering about those things, for better or worse. It probably drives my family crazy. But I mean, that's a prerequisite to being a coach, is to be curious. I mean, and so that is definitely a core value. One other core value, the three main ones our team works with are commitment, community, and quality. And I would say commitment is one that comes to mind first. When COVID started and we all went into quarantine, I woke up every day waiting for all of our clients to call and cancel their coaching subscriptions. Because we're a premium service, we work with small business owners who all had to close their businesses for a few months. They lost, 95% of their revenue. So every day I woke up like, okay, it's going to be fine. We're going to be fine. But the calls are coming today. I just know it. We're not an essential business. So I just waited, and not one of our clients canceled. And as I woke up every day praising Jesus for that and really exploring, like, what is it? How did that happen? I truly, 110% believe it's because our clients know we care about them so deeply as human beings more than as clients. And I can say that about every person on our team. There's not one person where there's a little question mark. I mean, hands down, everybody treats our clients that way. And I truly believe that's why people stuck around, because they knew they were partnering with a coaching team that was going to be there when they needed us.
Yeah. So tell me how it's one thing for you to hold these beliefs, right? And create a company with these beliefs. But again, how do you ensure that the people who work for you, this also runs through and they show up with those core values in mind? And to ensure that, like, the snowball effect, kind of to keep on that theme, how you're able to continue that even when you're not in the room.
There were many years I did not do a good job at that. I mean, I did a real bad job, actually. And what came of it was me having to let people go. Nobody likes letting people go. Nobody. That is not fun. But yeah, there was a season where I just didn't know how to do that well. I didn't know how to build culture and inspire others to live our values. And so it caused some friction. Yeah, and I was a real bad leader, I would say, in many seasons. So I think learning from that, what I've learned is right out of the gates. If someone is interested in being on our team, the first thing we do is talk about, here is who we are. If this is not you, cool, let's remain friends. If this is you, join the team, and what can I do to support you in building these values? So it is the first thing we talk about right out the gate. One thing that we do as a team is we're not your coach for 60 minutes a week. We're not your coach within the walls of a session. Like, if you partner with us, we are all in. And so our coaches are constantly reaching out to our clients throughout the week, showing up at their events, checking in with them. How are your kids? And that is something that in the very first interview, I say, this is who we are. And like, I don't expect you to take part in that if that's not who you are. That's okay. But it's really important to me that our coaches are caring for our clients that way. And so literally one of the first things I say is, this is us. How do you feel about that? And so that's been one thing. And the other thing is we just talk about our values all the time. And anytime I get any kind of feedback from clients, I'll text the team and say, hey, this is a great example of how coach so-and-so is practicing being high quality or practicing building community. So, good job, coach. So it's just, we make it a constant part of our discussions. But again, that's learning from not doing it well.
So what would you say, is there like a pivotal moment you remember, like shifting from like not doing it well to doing it well, or like a season of life? I won't say like one event, but like a season of life that you remember, like, oh, I'm transitioning into being the leader I want to be versus the leader I have been.
Yeah. I don't know if in my mind I was thinking this is the leader I want to be, or if in my mind I was thinking I don't want to fire any more people. So I think that's where my mind was. And yeah, we went to, it's funny, I was in a mastermind group and I was not in the hot seat that day. Someone else was, and she was talking about how she had people on her team that weren't the right fit and what should she do. And I'm sitting there helping her with what to do. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, Laine, you're such a hypocrite. Like, you have 2 people on your team right now that you should not have on your team. They were awesome individuals and they were awesome coaches. They just weren't the right fit. And I knew that. And so I went home that day and I was like, you know what? It's time to make this change. And that was the day. I mean, I remember it clear as day because I thought, you know what? This isn't caring for them well by letting them remain on a team where they feel like they can't do their job as expected, right? That causes a lot of tension. And I'm not doing my clients any favors because they're not, being treated in the way that we had told them they would be treated. That really was a day that stands out very clearly in my mind where I realized, yeah, well, I don't want to be a hypocrite. So I need to start practicing what I preach.
Yeah. I mean, talk about living the value of community and how that held you accountable, right? So the core values, like they ring true, it sounds like all the way back to maybe before you built this successful business that you have today, and like having that community and that mastermind group in order to like live out what you're trying to accomplish in your business. That's great.
Being a part of different social groups and different communities really is one of the greatest ways for leaders to learn and grow. And so, yeah, we're big on that. In 2018, we started in 2016. And in 2018, the team and I realized we have some really awesome clients. Like these are really cool people who are doing really cool things and they need to know each other. And so that is where the value of community came to be, because we said, let's start a group where they can all know each other. And so we started something called the Business Lab, where we would get together and do workshops and just do social events and barbecues so that they could all get together. And I got to tell you, the result was so cool. It was these people getting together that started working together on projects and growing together. And that was it for me. I was like, this makes my heart wings flutter. This is just life-giving for everyone. I want in. And so community and how can we connect our people to each other? How can we resource them well? That's been a real fun thing to be a part of.
So how have you shifted that in the midst of like the pandemic was after that, right? And then people went remote, and I imagine you have some remote clients. So like, what does that look like today in order to maintain some of that community in this ever evolving, I'll call it, work environment?
Kristi, we're struggling with that. It is a struggle. It is. So we stopped all our live events, and then we went to virtual events, and then people got sick of Zoom. So then we'd have like 3 people show up. It used to be like 50. And then after a while, everyone gets tired. And so we're like, okay, we're going to cut this out for a bit and just take a pause. And then we came back really strong after quarantine. We had a huge blowout party at my house. There was like 100 people here.
Oh, so cool.
It was fun. But then it was weird. I mean, then after that, we have events and just people didn't want to go out anymore, but they also didn't want to be on Zoom. And so we were like, what is happening? It was this weird shift. And to be honest, Chris, we're still navigating it. We have a new plan in 2024 because it really is such a big belief of ours, like that people need people, right? And so how do we build community? We're still trying to figure that out with the new work sitch. It's very different now. We have a new program coming out for clients, and because the Business Lab moved from clients to just everybody. If you were a professional, come on over. And so everybody just started joining. We're going to start small though and set our expectations at a healthy level. So in January, none of the clients know this. So if they're listening, surprise everybody, we're going to start monthly client events in January, because while the extent of it might not be as much as it used to be, we do still want to connect our clients because we feel like that's a big part of why they join our community. So we're going to start that every month again in January. But Kristi, you're right. It is weird now. And we're trying to figure it out. I would be curious to hear what you've learned. I mean, have you yourself or any of your clients figured out good ways to connect people?
So I think the navigation, to your point, is still happening. When I consult with my clients, instead of it being this or that, what I try to uncover with them is like the why behind why people are gathering. So I read the book, The Art of Gathering, and it was a fantastic book. If you haven't read it.
Writing it down right now.
Yeah, it might be great to see thought-provoking content to help you understand like where to go next. But it talks about personally and professionally, like why people gather and to have intention behind why you're gathering so that the right people come to the table versus it just being like this thing people either feel an obligation to come to or don't know why they would go in the first place. So it's really setting the intention. And that goes for a dinner party that you have or asking people to come back into the office. Like, why are you asking them to come back in? Because what I hear from people is, why would I go in when I'm just going to be on Zoom all day? I could just do it from my house. And that's true. So make people have a reason to go in so that maybe they're not on Zoom all day. I mean, I was thinking back, way back when in my corporate life, when I was in an office and I didn't have very many meetings online, if at all. Every once in a while, we'd like Zoom in somebody from another office across the US or in Europe, but most of the meetings were happening live and in person. And so there was a reason to be there. And so I think that as I'm consulting with clients of the why behind why they're gathering, and we can get really, really specific. Maybe it's to build culture. What does that mean? What does that look like? Maybe it's to communicate something. Maybe it's because everyone comes in on Tuesdays and we only do live meetings. So do not schedule a Zoom meeting on that day, right? So it's like giving intention to the time together versus it just being so.
Yeah, good. That's something I got to think about now. All right, I'm going to read that book. Another great book that talks a lot about this. Have you read You're Invited? Great, fascinating book. But it's very similar to what you're talking about. So if you're a reader, if any of your audience are readers, check out You're Invited. And I don't remember who the author is, but I can see the cover. It's a great book. It's a great book.
It's all good. It's just a Google search away.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Google.
Okay. So the last thing before we get into a little bit of fun in the lightning round is like, if you could give people listening or leaders one piece of advice, like go do this now. They listen to the podcast and they walk away and they can go actionably do something that will positively impact workplace vibes. What is that? And what do you feel like so strongly and convicted about that will help?
Bring your values to life and interweave them into everything your company does.
I love it. So great. Yeah, because then you're authentically you.
And again, it comes back to that idea of like path of least resistance. Like you don't have to go out there and build a big plan. You just do what you do based on who you are.
I love it. Okay, we're going to have a little fun now. It's this or that, this or that. First thing that comes to mind. So cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Day or night?
Day.
Mountains or beach?
Beach.
Theater or Netflix?
I'm stumped. This is so much pressure, Kristi. Oh no. Let me think. Theater, Netflix. Oh my gosh. I am like, my inner thespian is dying right now. But I think I'm gonna have to go with Netflix only because our whole family bonds more over that than the musical theater. It's the only reason I'm picking that. But I do love musical theater.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Last one, it's not a this or that, but favorite color?
Red.
So you must love Christmas then. It's just so much red.
Oh, that is an understatement. Yes. It's the most magical time of the year. Okay, what's your favorite holiday?
I love the season between Thanksgiving and to the New Year because it's just like, ooh, there's a lot of looking back and reflecting and like time together as a family and like the sense of the season, like the candle I have lit behind me, and just like all of those things are just so warm.
I would love to offer a fun and helpful tool to your audience members. We have something we use with our clients often called the Values Matrix. And it's a table. I mean, it's a matrix, a table that you can put in there what your values are. And then it gives you those 5 categories where your values can be instilled and how you're going to do it. And it's a really, really simple but powerful tool that any team can get together and do. And it's a productive use of time. And so I would love to offer that to your team. So I can email that to you and you can get that out however you see fit.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So much value in what you shared today. And I just really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Kristi. Always a good time connecting with you.
Awesome. It was so much fun chatting with Laine to hear her share her experiences and how her mentors have shaped her career and her approach to creating or helping others create great work vibes. Her emphasis on caring for people and encouraging leaders to bring their values to life is what really gets her fired up. And you can see that come through in her passion during our discussion. If you're interested in integrating your values into how you do everything you do, work, lead, or simply just how you do life, Laine has a tool called the Value Matrix to get you started. This is available to each of you as a free download. Don't wait. Check it out today. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.